Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Where in the world are you? Hello, hello, hello. Form and formless. You know, we talk about form and formless. Sunny California, that's right. And Japan. Form and formless. It's sometimes we think of form as being dual and formless as non-dual. Okay? So if form is dual and formless is non-dual, it's kind of tricky because form and formless, the concept of that is duality itself, isn't it? So if form and formless is duality and form is duality, then I see comparing form to formless how formless would be non-dual, but is it really? So just a little thing to entertain our thoughts. Why don't we say that? A little thing to entertain our thoughts. And I want to talk about a couple interesting concepts today, but here's part of what came to me. You ready? Stories. We all kind of have stories. Stories of different things that happened to us at different times in our lives, and how they were interpreted. What about the idea of waking up in God? And don't let the word God throw you. I'm using God, as I always do, as an inclusive term. We could replace the word with love or Allah or infinite intelligence. So God, love, infinite intelligence, whatever word you want. We often spend a lot of time, the word journey has always been very popular. I don't always love the word journey for multiple reasons, just because it really does imply that you're going from here to there, one place to another place, and it by itself is a separation or division. But leaving all that aside, how many of you, ask yourself, do you feel that on one level or another, you are on a journey to find your spirituality, a journey to spirituality, to that recognition of spirituality, a journey to God, a journey to love, a journey to healing, whether it's a journey to your own healing or a journey to and or also be able to facilitate healings for others. It's still a sort of from here to there, but I'm not even going to stop on that point. We can use the word journey today. Let's just use it, realize that we're not trying to build time and distance and space and turn it into something really solid that way and divisive between duality and non-duality. Let's just use it anyway and allow it to mean to us without the semantics, what we want for the purpose of this discussion. I believe I heard this with Rupert Spira, but I'm sure it's been spoken by others too. The concept of the journey. When you don't know where to begin, you've already started. The journey to God ends, and the journey in God begins. The journey to your spirituality ends, and then the journey in that begins. The journey to tends to often be steps. And yet, somewhere inside of us, we recognize that we are already in. The journey into our spirituality is designed to lead us into our spirituality, and yet don't you already know that you are spiritual? You do. Inside. You do. If you're not sure, close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, am I already the spiritual being that I am? Am I already spirituality? Listen quietly. You'll probably hear the same answer that I'm hearing. Yes, because we're all one. So where are we going? Maybe we're just not paying attention as fully as we'd like to. Don't you love this? It's considered so tasteless to have a tea bag hanging out of your cup, but it's easier to pull it out and dunk it with later. And the color's nice. A journey is a series of steps. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, or a rolling forward, a moving in a direction. And we often look for, how do I journey here? Do I have my flashlights and my drinking cup and my herbal bug repellent? And what do I do? And I apply, when do I do this? When do I do that? I apply the bug repellent at night and drink at a consistent pace so I don't dehydrate. And by the time I'm becoming thirsty, I'm already a little dehydrated. And where are my steps? What am I doing? Is it any different in the healing world? No, of course not. And this attracts us because it brings us a certain level of certainty, a familiarity of knowing what to do. It keeps us in doing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Our energy healing techniques are our journey into healing, our journey to recognize that we not only are healers for others, for ourselves, because ultimately there are no others. There's only one. So ultimately we are healing itself. Not even the healer or the healers, but we're healing itself. So, Jazzy Keiko just put in, synchronicity, one leads to another. It goes on and on. When you accept what happens for what it is, it goes just like when the pupil is ready, or when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But just as most of us do, if we're familiar with that, is we only think about the first part. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. But what's the second part of that? If you go look it up, you're going to find out the second part of that is when the student is really ready, the teacher disappears. Okay? When the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is really ready, the teacher disappears. Does a teacher need to be or appear as a person? Don't we learn from other things than people? We learn from observation of ourselves and our own interactions. So, when the student is ready, synchronicities may lead us to the technique. The technique appears and we practice it. But when the student is really ready, the technique disappears. Does that mean it's intentional? No, not necessarily. Sometimes the doing of it just becomes so rote, so automatic that we go, oh, I'm back. But we didn't realize we left. We never said, oh, I'm leaving now, but I'll be back. That was Arnold Schwarzenegger. We are, in our techniques, facilitating. How many of you find yourself in your energy healing techniques, if you do them, facilitating the crystal or the steps, whatever they are, the directions, the instructions, the procedure, the order, when to spray the bug spray, when to take the drink. How many of us find ourselves in the techniques and then suddenly we have to remember, oh, come back. I forgot. Come back. I forgot. Because we are the healing. We're using the technique to bring about the healing because we've forgotten that we are the healing. So, at a certain point, why do we kind of lose consciousness and come back? Why do we, must have gotten sidetracked. My thoughts and left. Because really, our main intention is to be present, is to be facilitating a healing. So what causes us to check out and come back? And is it a problem? Or is it a gift? How is it a gift for me to check out and have to remember to go back into my healing technique? Or just deep in my cognizant thinking mind? I mean, isn't my client depending on it? Or for me to be doing my self-healing, aren't I depending on that? Did I leave? Did I short myself to have to come back? But what leaves? When you come back, are you reconnecting? Or how can you be reconnecting if you've never disconnected, unless the disconnection is an illusion in itself, and the reconnecting is the recognition of that, and therefore the disconnection never happened, and therefore actually the reconnection never happened because it never left. Now, all of that is great, but what do we do with that? We bring it into the thinking mind. So, how do we bring it into the thinking mind? Well, when sometimes the technique does us the favor of boring us. Just a little bit bored, a little bit rote, a little bit repetitive. And our thinking mind goes, I kind of had enough of that, and checks out on us. Doesn't ask our personality whether we want to leave, it just checks out on us. We come back, our personality goes, oh crap, I didn't want to do that, but maybe we really did. Our thinking mind, our personality, our ego, or whatever we want to call it, didn't want to do that, but maybe ultimately we did. Maybe in the personality, that's us trying. But the oneness, the consciousness that we are, at a certain point goes, I'm here, I'm consciousness. It kind of, in our personality, consciousness has sort of taken a back seat. In a sense, you could say it's sort of forgotten itself. It can't really forget itself because it's consciousness, but let's just use it as an analogy, a metaphor. It's not completely accurate, but so it's like the consciousness that we are has forgotten cognizantly that it's consciousness, and so our personalities come about. And when it's ready, when our personalities just let go for that moment, gets bored or whatever, suddenly we're one, we're consciousness. So it's like what I wanted to touch on a little bit last time. It's like we are pixels, we are avatars of ourselves. We're not really a body, we're not really a mind. We're consciousness. But what we see in the mirror, or when we talk to friends or our parents or whoever, we're looking at avatars. We're putting clothes on avatars. We're seeing these pixels. But when us as the pixel, as the avatar, gets bored and disappears, consciousness, our beingness, steps in. But we're not aware of that because our cognizance, our consciousness, isn't taking place in the thinking mind. So suddenly something snaps us back. The ego snaps us back. Well, here I am again, supposed to be doing this technique. The funny thing is when we as the avatar, as that pixel, as the illusion disappears, and we are simply presence, infinite being, playing with the analogy, consciousness has sort of unforgotten itself. That's who we are. But when we return as the avatar, we come back just a little bit changed. The pixels just a little bit changed. Something's different. And we're more in balance, more present, physically present, healthy in another way. We say, oh, we received a healing. When one pixel changes, all the other pixels are affected. So wherever, however, that healing sort of took place, it's affecting all the avatars. All the avatars. Even the ones driving the car that cut you off in traffic. Even that avatar. So it's kind of like what happens during a healing experience, during a reconnective healing experience, what happens, whether you're viewing yourself as a client or as a facilitator, when we suddenly, you lie down to relax, or you start your session, you disappear as a healing facilitator during your session too when you come back, as much as when you're lying there in your session and you come back. So why is it that, we're present, physically aware of ourselves, and then we don't feel our body or our mind? We're not even aware of it, and then suddenly we do. What happened? Where did I come back from? But when we do, we are perceiving these pixels differently, whether it's us as a pixel or an avatar, whether it's someone else as a pixel or an avatar. The pixel has changed. Infinite being hasn't. But it's allowed for the balancing of the representation, the avatar, the icon. And it's slightly different than it was. Different awareness. It has different internals. You have different internals. You have different externals. It's almost like a change or a different thought. If you think that here behind me is a book, it's a book. And then you unforget. You're in infinite balance and infinite presence. And when you return, something's a little rebalanced, something's a little refined. And now it looks like two books or a cup of tea. And it is that. It's a pixel. It's kind of a space-time. It's composition, an image. That's what a thought is, really. A thought is an image. An image doesn't exist when you're not observing it. Now, I know that this is a little tricky because we're saying, well, my car is outside and it exists and I'm not observing it. Well, that's the way it appears to us. But if you really listen to more cutting edge researchers with a lot of research and support behind them, you listen to, for example, Donald Hoffman's share on this. And all the research that he'll bring up behind it and such, that nothing appears. I mean, things only appear. How can we say that? They only exist when you're observing it. When I go out there, I know my car will be there. That's true. You'll be observing it. It's a difficult concept, and so a lot of these concepts are very difficult to get from listening to the words. Until you recognize the experience of it, it's hard to get. So, for instance, let's play with this one. Maybe, for those of you who may have been born during a near-death experience, for example, and my mother died on the table. When my mother died, while I was being birthed, consciousness recognized her, remembered her, unforgot her. In this physical form we're running around, consciousness is sort of forgotten for the sake of this analogy, and here we are. In pixel form, we appear very real, so we're not really existing as consciousness awareness. So my mother, consciousness unforgot her. She vanished. She died. Then there she is again. maybe significant enough that consciousness wanted to allow more of that experience. So consciousness forgot her again. And there she is. And when she had disappeared, her icon, mine that was inside of her, disappeared too. And there we were, just as consciousness, not aware of ourselves, because we were consciousness, didn't know that we disappeared, and then came back. Some material change in her pixel, my pixel. I mean, there's definitely a change if you speak to people who have life after death experiences. I know, more popularly called near-death experiences, but when you're there. You're not just near. She came back with a lifelong fear of death was gone. When I heard that story, something triggered in me and mine was gone as a 5-year-old child or so. So we've got some material. Our pixels, when we disappear in a reconnective healing experience, for example, and return, we're composed of forgetting and unforgetting, forgetting and unforgetting, forgetting and unforgetting. And that is present in our expression. Some of what we're doing, some of what we're sharing, how we're sharing it, as we're sharing it. Sometimes we recognize the truth of who we are. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to understand that we're merely pixels. We're not anything more than a pixel. Avatar, icon, however we want to represent it. Donald Hoffman, I mentioned, Bernardo Kastrup, Rupert Spira, others will share this with us from their varying I'll say perspectives, but just listening to this from different words is like shining lights from different angles on a truth that allows us to wake up. On a formless that allows us to recognize that formless is not a dual concept unless we're busy contrasting it with the illusion of form. I'm only observable when I'm being observed. You're observing me, I'm observing you. Fundamentally, this is what happens in a near-death experience. Fundamentally, this is what happens to varying degrees in healing experiences. And whenever we disappear, this is what happens when we allow ourselves to get involved in doing or methods that bring us to a point of boredom. And sometimes we say we're daydreaming, except they're not daydreams that we are aware of during. Therefore, they're not really dreams. Well, they're not really dreams. This is the whole concept of, as I said, what Lynn McTaggart and others are expressing when they say reconnective healing is contagious, because the pixels share this. We all kind of go home. We wake up at home We just don't think of it that way because we're not recognizing it. Cognizantly, we think when we come back here, we've awakened. And this is actually back in the dream. The healing has taken place there, and now it's affected our pixels. We get to see how it looks differently, how we function differently. It's the remembering. It's oneness remembering itself is where the healing is. It leaves little traces inside of these pixels. These traces within us are the I am. That we are the I am. That you are. It's really kind of the highest form of a spiritual word. I am. Jillian says that. She also says, maybe consciousness has to unforget itself in order to say I am. Jillian can be so brilliantly incisive. And she shares, but consciousness never really completely loses itself because it can't, because it is everything, right? The infiniteness of everyone and everything, that it pixelates and forgetting itself is so infinite, it can't even be captured. There's no, again, I love how Jillian says, there's no mathematical equation for I am. Never. There's no theory of everything for it. There's no theory of everything because nothing is really here the way we think of here. It's just that which is, having forgotten itself. This is actually immensely freeing as you allow it to be. The personality, the ego, resists it because the ego does not exist as such in consciousness. The only difference between reconnective healing and healing techniques is that the division, the separations, the otherness of this is this technique, this is that technique, this is not that technique, disappears. And healing reconnects. Healing is never really disconnected. We've only allowed ourselves to see and recognize parts of it as we stay in the technique until something inside of us, that knowingness, says, all right, enough of this illusion of otherness and separation and judgment, and am I doing it better or worse than someone else or something else, and is there a different form of Reiki or Qigong that might be better or more inclusive, or if I just combine them. Separation self-dissolves. The ego, the personality, tries to reconstruct the illusion of it again. Judgment. Am I directing the healing the right way? Jillian and I were listening a little bit to the concept of, I love to listen to all the great people in our, spiritual and religious histories as well as those not involved in it. But, sometimes so many beautiful things are said there if we don't block ourselves from listening and learning because it's not of our religion. Or how much we follow a religion. But wasn't it Jesus who said, toss the seeds, just toss them, toss them. Don't worry about planting them in the exact place. You know, they hit the cement, it doesn't matter. Toss the seeds, put them out there. The right ones will spark, just toss the seeds. Let it go. You're having an argument with someone you love. You're sort of looking at each other as other than. You're perceiving two things. The ultimate is to glimpse or to recognize that there aren't two things. That's consciousness unforgetting itself. Then it forgets itself again. I wanted to go somewhere with this today. This part that we're talking about right now is just supposed to be my lead-in. I guess it's going to lead me into next week where we go with it. So I wanted to talk about waking up in God, an infinite being. Because our steps are, see, now I am sort of talking about it. Now I have other things I want to talk about, but oh well. Our steps are what we do to get closer. But when we get just so bored with our steps, when we allow our techniques to do what they're designed to do, to self-dissolve, suddenly we find that we already are in God, one with God, beingness, infinite. We've been spending all that time trying to get to where we already are, looking to become who and what we already are. The very real appearing illusion of not being healthy, of needing a healing. It's all about forgetting and remembering. And the forgetting of this illusory presence allows us to be in the infinite presence where the rebalance takes place and then it returns. That's all it is. Consciousness unforgets itself, and it forgets itself, and it unforgets itself, and it remembers. It doesn't feel that way in the body-mind. Joe Dispenza will recognize or talk about that. When we find the capacity to transcend above and out of our thinking mind, we transcend above and out of the past, out of the rears. When we have a near-death experience, we transcend out of the rears. There's something there, there's some material there, and the pixel changes. Pixel to pixel to pixel. Fundamentally, there's nothing metaphysical in this room. In that sense, we're pixels, but fundamentally there's nothing more mystical in this room. The fact that we get to see beauty all the time. As Jillian is always saying, thank you, God. Maybe we have the ability to pixelate and unpixelate and repixelate a little more fluidly than we may have recognized. Maybe we're less of a complex thought in the analogy of the mind of God than we thought. We're going to talk a little bit about walking toward where we already are, and a different way to recognize and perceive our stories. Maybe we'll use the analogy a little bit of how I recognize and perceive my, what Jillian calls one strange night story with the lamp turning on and everything else, but maybe it really wasn't so strange after all. Maybe it's all in how we interpret it until we get a little bored with the interpretation and return to infinite consciousness. Lots of love. Bye for now.